This is the last known footage of Dalene Carlson. She's a 23-year-old student who had just moved into a new place, ready to begin a new chapter in her life. In the video, she appears happy, relaxed, and smiling. But take a closer look. A man, seemingly a stranger, walks up and puts his arm around her waist. Almost immediately, Dalene heads for the restroom. It's clear his presence made her uncomfortable. 20 minutes later, she walks outside and approaches someone. Through the glare from the lights makes it impossible to see who it is. That's when things get strange. Dalene acting weird, completely out of character. What happened that night? Why was she so visibly shaken by the stranger? When investigators reviewed every available frame of surveillance footage, they uncovered a chilling truth, one almost too disturbing to believe.
Dalene didn't deserve anything that happened to her. Not one bit of it.
23-year-old student Dalene Carlson was getting ready for a Saturday night out, carefully picking her outfit and doing her makeup. She was excited, nervous too. Having just moved to Stockton, she couldn't help but wonder how she'd fit in with her new classmates. Starting over at a new school is never easy, and Dalene was feeling the pressure. She was staying with her Aunt Maggie and cousin Cecily, who were thrilled when they heard Dalene plan to move in. Without hesitation, they welcomed her into their home.
Dalene was very excited to come to Stockton to go to school. She had potential to do whatever she wanted to do.
When I found out that Dalene wanted to come here and live with us, it made me feel really good. She feels comfortable with being with her auntie. Made me feel proud.
With 3 months still left before the new school year began, Dalene had plenty of time to explore the local scene and get a taste of the nightlife. Cecily happily took on the role of tour guide. The two cousins had a lot in common, and their shared interests made it easy for them to connect. That night, the plan was to hit up Finnegan's pub together and enjoy the evening with some friends. But things didn't go as expected. Cecily came down with a fever and decided to stay home. Dalene, still eager to go, promised Aunt Maggie she'd be back by 1 a.m. and went on her own. But Dalene never came home, neither at the time she promised, nor any time after. As the hours passed, worry turned to panic. Maggie spent the entire night trying to reach her niece, calling her phone again and again. But the line stayed silent.
I kept calling her and I didn't get an answer. I was up the whole night and just constantly trying to call and find out where she's at.
Maggie tried to calm herself, thinking that Dalene might have just stayed over at a friend's house, so she decided to wait until morning. But when morning came, there was still no sign of Dalene. No calls, no messages. She was still missing.
I was calling all the people that Cecily knew, hoping they could tell me something, but none of them really knew either. Then I really started getting worried. Can't just drop off the face of the earth.
After an uneasy, sleepless night, Maggie knew deep down that her niece hadn't just vanished without reason. Trusting her instincts, she finally picked up the phone and called the police. Unfortunately, they told her there wasn't enough of a reason to start an official investigation yet. Too little time had passed since Dalene had gone missing. Not willing to wait any longer, Dalene's family took matters into their own hands and began investigating on their own. There was something strange and unsettling about her sudden disappearance. It just wasn't like Dalene. As the hours passed, her family became more and more convinced that something horrible had happened to her. A full day had gone by since that Saturday night, and there was still no trace of Dalene. A group of volunteers conducted a thorough search of the area, but they came back empty-handed. With each passing hour, the disappearance of the 23-year-old student seemed more suspicious. Eventually, the police made the decision to open a formal criminal investigation. Detectives Brad Burrell and Larry Lane from the Stockton Police Department were assigned to lead the case.
Dalene was kind of your all-American girl. She was a young, attractive, intelligent lady who had a very bright future ahead of her. Her disappearance was highly unusual. Something really just kind of struck a chord with me, and it really seemed to me that this was not right.
Their first priority was an obvious one. They needed to speak with Dalene's cousin, Cecily. Cecily immediately handed over a photo to the detectives taken the night Dalene went missing. It clearly showed what Dalene had been wearing, a brown and white striped top and ripped jeans. The next logical step for the investigation was a visit to Finnegan's Pub, the spot where Dalene had planned to spend her evening. Hoping for a break in the case, detectives made their way there. One of the bartenders recognized her immediately. He recalled seeing Dalene outside the bar around midnight on the night she disappeared. Although he could recount the events of that night in detail, nothing had stood out to him as unusual. Still, there was reason for hope. The bar had been busy that night, meaning there were plenty of people who might have seen or spoken to Dalene. On top of that, the pub had 2 surveillance cameras. Going through the footage would be time-consuming, but with no better leads, the detectives had to work with what they had. They gathered the recordings, headed back to the station, and began the tedious task of examining every frame.
I was hopeful that it would very clearly show who Dalene spent the evening with, and most importantly, who Dalene left with.
The detectives started reviewing the footage from midnight, the time the bartender had said he saw Dalene. In the video, they saw groups of young people hanging out near the entrance to the bar. Everything appeared normal, just another typical Saturday night. Then, one girl caught their attention. She was wearing a striped top, strikingly similar to the one Dalene had worn the night she disappeared, and when she turned toward the camera, it became clear. It was Dalene Carlson, 23 years old. With their focus now sharp, the detectives paid closer attention to Dalene's movements. At 12:41 a.m., she was seen entering the bar again. There was another security camera inside, positioned near the bathrooms, giving them a new angle for their investigation. Dalene seemed to be having a great time, looking happy, relaxed, and smiling. It was obvious that she had been drinking, which made her more vulnerable than she would have been otherwise. Moreover, in the hallway, she was the only woman surrounded by a group of young men. Any one of them could have been a potential suspect, but for now, they were all just witnesses. She was chatting and smiling with the guys, looking carefree and in a good mood. Then at 12:48 a.m., a new figure appeared on the footage, a young man with a goatee and a backwards cap. He approached Dalene from behind, put his arm around her waist, and in an instant, she stepped aside and rushed into the bathroom. The man walked off as if nothing had happened. The detectives noticed that Dalene looked uncomfortable with the man's presence. It was obvious something had made her uneasy. Without hesitation, they decided to track down the man with the goatee and question him. After interviewing Dalene's friends, the detectives identified the man in the footage as Jason Gilley. He was a close friend of Dalene and Cecily, frequently hosting parties at his place. When the detectives asked where he was the night Dalene disappeared, Jason confirmed he had been at the bar and saw her there for the last time.
Jason said that he had been at the bar with Dalene that night and that the plan was that he was going to give her a ride home.
But she declined, and around 1 a.m., Jason left the bar and went home. He didn't stay long because he needed to care for his sick brother. By 1:30 a.m., Jason was back home, which his grandmother could verify. With no reason to doubt his alibi, the police had to accept his account and return to square one. However, before they left, Jason suggested they talk to someone else, Jacob Evangelisti.
Jason told us that Dalene had been recently dating Jacob Evangelisti.
But just 4 days before the girl disappeared, the two had a huge argument in front of their friends. The detectives were intrigued by the young man's identity. After thoroughly checking Dalene's social media profiles, they found several photos of Jacob. When they revisited the surveillance footage, they confirmed he had been at the bar that night. Rewinding to the moment Dalene exited the restroom, they focused intently on her actions, determined not to miss a single detail. At 1:46 a.m., Dalene walked outside and immediately struck up a conversation with an unknown man leaning against the wall. His presence seemed to have a noticeable effect on her behavior.
Dalene is very demonstrative with her hands and her body language. It seemed as though she was rather angry about something.
It could have been Jacob, but the glare from a bright light made it impossible to identify the man's face right away. Then, just seconds after Dalene turned and walked away, the man stepped forward, and his face finally came into view. It was Jacob Evangelisti. Detectives brought him in for questioning. He was visibly anxious, but admitted to seeing Dalene that night. According to him, she broke up with him at Finnegan's bar, which clearly upset him. He hadn't expected it. According to Jacob, she left the bar alone not long after their conversation. He was quick to emphasize, again and again, that he had nothing to do with her disappearance, but the detectives weren't convinced. They went back to the surveillance footage, determined to find out whether Jacob's story held up. At 1:09 a.m., security footage captures Jacob walking into the bar. A few minutes later, Dalene is seen heading outside. She says her goodbyes to a group of friends, then disappears from view at 1:15 a.m. The detectives kept reviewing the footage until the final customer walked out and Finnegan's shut its doors for the night. By 2:28 a.m., the lights at Finnegan's were turned off, and the street outside had gone completely quiet. Neither Dalene nor Jacob showed up on camera again. After carefully reviewing the footage, the detectives came to a chilling conclusion. All signs pointed to Jacob Evangelisti as the person likely involved in Dalene Carlson's disappearance. The detectives concentrated on Dalene's ex-boyfriend as their prime suspect.
The fact that Jacob and Dalene had just broken up and that he was upset about it provided motive for Jacob being the one responsible.
Unfortunately, the police still had no evidence linking anyone to the crime involving Dalene. There were numerous scenarios, one being that someone could have abducted her off the street and taken her in an unknown direction. While the police were still trying to piece together the puzzle, Dalene's family and friends were carrying out their own search. They printed flyers with details about Dalene's disappearance and handed them out at people across the city. None of them gave up hope of finding her. After questioning the main suspect again, the detectives didn't learn anything new. Jacob Evangelisti continued to deny any knowledge of what happened, but instead of confessing, he dropped a new name for the police to follow up on: James' cousin. James was part of Dalene's social circle. According to Jacob, he was the last person to see Dalene before she vanished. While James and Dalene had never been on an official date, there was a strong mutual attraction between them. Moreover, Cousin was a close friend of Jason Gilley, and the two practically lived together.
It was very curious that Dalene would engage in this relationship and then almost immediately thereafter disappear. That lent itself to a great deal of suspicion around James and the possibility that he was somehow responsible for the disappearance of Dalene Carlson.
James didn't deny their connection, openly admitting that he and Dalene had shared a close relationship. However, when it came to the night of her disappearance at Finnegan's, he claimed to know nothing about it. He said he wasn't even in town that night, as he had been on a church trip, something that could be verified by several people. The investigation seemed to stall once again, but James did offer one valuable lead.
James did tell us that there was a text message conversation between he and Dalene on the night of her disappearance.
The last message from Dalene, sent early Sunday morning, mentioned that after leaving the bar, she was heading to a friend's party. While the identities of those friends were still unknown, this information led the detectives to reconsider their theory. It seemed that Dalene wasn't finished for the night after leaving the bar. She probably planned to keep going and likely intended to buy more alcohol. The detectives quickly compiled a list of 24-hour stores and identified the closest one to Finnegan's bar, Food for Less. Fortunately, the store had security cameras. If Dalene had gone inside, she would likely have been captured on at least one of them. Starting the review from the moment Dalene Carlson was last seen, the detectives got a stroke of luck. Dalene appeared on the security cameras, walking through the store with an unknown man. Although they couldn't identify him yet, the footage from the internal cameras showed them casually moving through the store, behaving as if everything was normal. After a few minutes, they seemed to make their purchase and were ready to check out. Still, the identity of the mysterious man remained unclear. The detectives switched back to the cameras inside the store, waiting for them to leave the store. Then, just seconds later, everything they thought they knew about the case was about to be turned upside down. At 1:31 a.m., the couple left the store, and the police got a clear shot of the man. His goatee and backwards baseball cap made it unmistakable. It was Jason Gilley. At last, the detectives had their first major lead. Jason had originally claimed he left Finnegan's bar alone around 1:30 a.m. and went straight home to look after his sick brother, but the investigation uncovered a different story.
The fact that Jason lied about having left the bar by himself meant to me that he immediately was suspect number one.
A whole week had passed since 23-year-old Dalene's disappearance, and after bringing Gilly in for questioning, the detectives in Stockton decided to make the guy sweat a little. They left him to stew for an hour before starting the interrogation.
Sorry it took so long. How's it going?
Getting tired.
What's that?
Getting tired.
Yeah.
The detectives didn't immediately show him the security footage that proved he had walked through the store with Dalene that night. Instead, they gave Jason another chance to tell his version of events.
What time did you get home?
About 1:20, 1:30.
When he lied again, the detectives realized he was digging himself into a hole, and it seemed unlikely he would be able to get out of it.
We don't expect you to know every minute of what you did.
That's not reasonable.
It's not reasonable.
Okay.
But that's the good thing with surveillance, video surveillance at different locations, the cameras. We know a lot more of what's going on.
Right.
Okay?
After another round of questioning, Jason, now visibly anxious, began to break down and told a different story. He admitted that, contrary to what he'd told his grandmother, he hadn't come home alone that night.
Jason, let's make it better.
Let's make it better right now.
Okay?
Did you guys have sex?
No.
Jason.
Jason,
Jason.
we had sex and we hung out for a little bit more and then she said she wanted to go home.
Jason wiped his tears and came up with another version of events. He claimed that on Sunday morning, after an argument, he drove Dalene home. He said that once she got out of the car, she walked towards her house, and that was the last time he saw her. However, the detectives found this story unconvincing and were certain Jason was still hiding something. With that in mind, they ramped up their pressure on him, determined to uncover the truth and finally figure out what had happened to Dalene.
And what else has slipped your mind, Jason? No. Jason.
Jason.
Jason. Jason.
No. Where are we going to find the body?
Help us find her.
Help
Jason.
us bring her home.
Her family deserves it,
You have a family. She has a family.
She deserves it. I know that.
She does.
I did not do anything to her.
Things seemed to be moving in the right direction, but in the end, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest Jason. There was still a chance that Dalene might be alive. Because of this, the interrogation had to be stopped. The investigation had dragged on for weeks and, unfortunately, had hit a dead end. Despite this, Dalene's family refused to lose hope. They kept fighting, holding on to the belief that their loved one was out there somewhere, safe, and everything would turn out okay. The detectives, too, didn't give up. They kept pushing forward, doing everything they could. From Jason's account, they discovered that after dropping Dalene off at her house, he had gone to get gas.
So I began visiting gas station after gas station around the route that I suspected Jason took.
Detective Brad Burrell eventually arrived at a gas station at the very south edge of Stockton. After reviewing the security footage starting at 5 a.m. on August 7th, the detectives were hoping to spot Jason's silver sedan. 6 hours into the search, they had yet to find any sign of the suspect. Just as their hope was starting to wane, a silver car pulled into the station at 11 o'clock a.m., nearly 9.5 hours after Jason and Dalene had visited Food for Less. It was Jason, and he was alone in the vehicle. At first, his behavior seemed completely innocent, but on closer inspection, the detectives noticed something strange. Jason appeared dirty and disheveled, with stains on his shirt and hands. The next footage showed him returning to his car, but before driving off, he checked the passenger door. After sitting for a moment, he opened the passenger door again, slammed it shut forcefully, and then drove away.
Seeing this footage makes me believe that Jason has driven her out to one of the fields somewhere south of Stockton, physically dragged her out of the car with such haste that the front passenger door didn't close properly. And I believe that Jason has murdered Dalene Carlson.
At the time, without solid evidence confirming Dalene Carlson's death, Jason Gilley remained a free man. Dalene, just 23 years old, had vanished in August 2011, and by October, her whereabouts were still a mystery, until a farmer, roughly 20 miles south of Stockton, made a grim discovery in one of his fields. It didn't take long for investigators to confirm that the body belonged to Dalene Carlson. She had been shot multiple times in the torso, with an additional gunshot wound to the back of the head. Nearby, investigators found several spent .22 caliber shell casings scattered on the ground.
I didn't want it to be her. I didn't want it to be Dalene. But then on the other side of it, I wanted closure, to know what happened, where she was, bring her home.
The investigation already had a prime suspect. What remained was gathering the evidence to prove his guilt and bring him to justice. Not long after the heartbreaking details of Dalene Carlson's fate were shared in the media, an informant came forward and contacted the police.
A young man called us and told us that Jason possessed a .22 caliber handgun that was not registered.
The gun was retrieved and compared with the casings found at the crime scene. It was confirmed to be the very same gun used in the killing. Gilley was finally behind bars. Since he refused to speak about what really happened, detectives took all the information they had gathered and pieced it together with the physical evidence to construct a timeline of the crime. On the evening of Saturday, August 6, 2011, a 23-year-old Dalene Carlson went out to Finnegan's Bar to meet friends. Unfortunately, among them was her future killer, Jason Gilley. He invited Dalene back to his place, and she agreed. On the way, they stopped at a store where surveillance cameras captured the last known footage of her alive. At first, it seemed like the two were having a good time, but at some point, everything took a dark and a tragic turn. The fact that Dalene was found without clothes raised suspicions that the motive behind the crime may have been Jason's intent to SA her. However, this theory couldn't be confirmed, as her body was too decomposed by the time it was discovered. Detectives believed Dalene might have threatened to turn Jason into the police, which could have triggered a violent reaction. Enraged, he allegedly forced the defenseless young woman into his car and drove away, mile after mile, passing her home and heading toward a remote cornfield. Realizing she was in serious danger, Dalene likely resisted. Jason, in response, shoved her out of the car and drove off, but moments later, he changed his mind and returned. Getting out of the car, he forced Dalene to her knees, raised the gun, and fired 3 times. He then, with no remorse, left her lifeless body in the field and drove to the nearest gas station. It was there that surveillance cameras captured footage that would play a critical role in ensuring justice, securing the conviction of the man who had taken the life of a young, innocent student. In 2011, Jason Gilley was found guilty in the case of Dalene Carlson and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The surveillance footage was key to the investigation, helping to piece together the details like a puzzle. However, this didn't change the harsh reality for Dalene's family and loved ones. Their lives would never be the same again.
It's not that you get over anything, but what really helps in the healing is remembering the good times. Remembering everything that was good when she was alive. What we did get was great.